Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I just had a few quick updates before we get to the meat of the episode and all the tolerating that we do here on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. So, I hope that you've heard that we have a Patreon, and now we have added a goal to get 25 Patreon members supporting the show. Once that happens, I have some cool perks planned out to release. Spoiler alert, one of them is a pen pal program because I love mail and I love putting stickers on envelopes. So head to the link in the show notes, head to the Patreon, and consider joining us and all the fun we could be having. Also, every Tuesday on Instagram Live at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, we are partnering with Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous to bring you Still Comfy with Jules and Nat. It's a show where we're looking at our comfort TV shows and movies to see if they still make us feel warm and gooey on the inside. So check it out. And I can't wait to see you, whether it's on Patreon, Instagram, or in the DMs. Love you all. Thanks for being here. Tolerators. This is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, the show where my guest and I chat about how misogyny affects the news we are fed. Today, my guest is Stacey Simms. Stacey is the host of the podcast Diabetes Connections and author of The World's Worst Diabetes Mom. She was also host of the top-rated morning radio show, Charlotte's Morning News. She's with me today to talk about how the patriarchy manifests itself in our news and what it is like building a community when you're reliant on our medical system. Thanks for being here, Stacey.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I don't know if I fully prepared you for this, but we go hard on everything that irritates me about our country.
Well, as the good podcast guests should do, I did listen to a couple episodes, and I'll be honest with you, and I think it's good to get this out up front. I almost emailed you and backed out.
Oh.
Because this is not something that I generally talk about. I am Generation X, a little older probably than you and your podcast guests and audience. And it's not something that we spend a lot of time talking about. It's something that we're all talking about now. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to listen to you. I've been listening to your episodes, and I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of think some of this stuff through. So thanks for indulging me as I kind of learn and grow.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for allowing me to be part of your learning opportunity. Before I lost all faith in our education system, I was a teacher.
I still have faith. I have a son who is going to be, when this airs, I have a son who is a senior in high school.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I have a daughter who's a senior in college.
Oh my goodness. So, yeah, double congratulations.
You're almost at the end.
You're going to have to throw so many barbecues this summer. All right. So we're just going to ease into this. You're allowed to guide this conversation wherever you want to dive deep into or wherever you're like, ooh, that makes my tummy uncomfy. Can we move on? But can you give us a little background on your career in news media?
Sure. So this is all I ever wanted to do. I was one of those weirdos who knew in middle school that this is what I was going to be for when I grew up. My career was going to be in broadcasting. And that's what I did. I went to college, and while I was for broadcasting, while I was in school, I interned at the local television station in news. I worked weekends at a news talk station in Syracuse, New York. So my senior year of college, I was trying to work in school and social life and being a terrible radio reporter, the worst, but it was great. And I learned a ton. And then I started in radio when I graduated, but my goal was to be a TV news reporter. And by the winter, after I graduated, December of that year, I had a job in television news, worked my way up to Charlotte, where I live now, and then just made a change, decided to move down the hall. It was the same building. And I decided to take a job in news talk radio. And I did that for 10 years, got up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was at the station at 4 a.m. The show went on at 5 a.m. And then I left, and we can talk about more about that. But I left when my daughter was in middle school
Hmm.
because it was too much for me. I just was not sleeping. My health was suffering. It was way too much, and it wasn't worth it. So I started my podcast,
Yeah.
and that's what I've done ever since. I love it. I have like I say, I have a small media company because I do. I do podcasting, voice work, commercials, and sell my show, write, speak, all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here over on Team Tolerator. But right now we've got the podcast as our most consistent form of media. That's amazing. You saying that it was just too much on your body and your sleep and all of it resonates with me so hard because that's why I had to leave teaching and my last job. It just becomes one of those things where, and we don't in this country, I was just talking about this because I was on another rant about the gaming community being a bunch of gatekeepers who don't understand why they can't get dates. And it's like, because you're mean to us when we come to play with you. That's why. But we don't have a lot of empathy in our current structures for things like rest or burnout and truly with teaching, and I'm sure news radio where they have a content calendar, there's truly no room for humanity right there and then.
It's a really interesting question. I'd push back a little bit. I think there is room for humanity. There is room for discussion. You're working with some really, really smart, engaged people who care immensely about what they're doing. There isn't any room for weakness.
Yeah.
They're really, because you're competing with people. I mean, from the minute I went to college, I'll never forget. I went to the Newhouse School at Syracuse University, and oh, we're so excited. We all got into this great broadcasting school. And the first day, the professor says, "Who is the editor of their school paper?" Right? And everybody's like, "Me." And then you look around, you're like, "Oh no, I'm not special anymore." Right? Everybody is the best. And when you're in that environment all the time, it's very difficult, and you have to continue that churn in a way
Hmm.
too for news. It's a never ending cycle. You have to deliver it every day. You have to have content. You have to be up. You have to be ready. So it was just it was about sleep, to be
Hmm.
honest with you, for me.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I made a change. And it just wasn't as rewarding after 10 years. Station ownership had changed, and
Hmm.
people had changed, and I had changed.
Yeah. I always think it's so, as a person who's stepped away from two career fields now, I'm always such a big celebrator of when people decide to bow out of something. I think that's something that I was never taught as a kid, that like if something has run its course, you are allowed to step away from it. I think that I kind of grew up with this mindset and it carries over into my romantic relationships where it's like, oh, are things getting tough? On harder. Maybe that'll help.
Well, it's one of those things where it's difficult, I think, for women especially to prioritize ourselves. One of the things I did when I was faced with this question of do I stay or do I go is I had also been quite sick.
Hmm.
I had excuse me, I had a series of odd circumstances. I had an allergic reaction to a medication, and that triggered something else. So I'm fine now, and I was okay then. And when I went back to work, my perspective had changed because I went back to work thinking, is this worth it?
Hmm.
Do I want to continue to be sleep deprived? My husband was working a completely opposite schedule. He owned and operated a restaurant. So he would get the kids in the morning. He would do all the stuff with the kids. Then we were on total split shifts.
Yeah.
I was bedtime, and any after school activities and all of that, which was fine when they were babies. But when you have a sixth grader who's out till 9 o'clock at night
Hmm.
with activities and you're driving and you have to be in bed, it was nuts. So I went back to work under the auspices of I'm going to see if this is worth it. I'm going to see if I'm going to stay. And I think I'm very lucky. I don't know how you teach that, but I think I'm very lucky in that I don't have that
Yeah.
hanging on. I switched jobs a lot in order to move up. I was 3 years here, 3 years there, 3 years there, and then 10 years, which was crazy for me. And now 7 years of this podcast, I'm getting itchy. It's a little much. I like it. I'm not going
Yeah.
anywhere. But I went in and said, is this good for me? And I feel like over the 10 years that I was working at that station, the culture kind of changed around me. This was from 2012, 2002 to 2012.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of discussion about Me Too. Well, that's a little later, but like Lean In,
Yeah.
and the language kind of changed. And it was less about sexual harassment and things like that than about like, well, pay equality.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of language and social media cropped up all during that time. You know, when I went to that job, we didn't have, it sounds crazy, we didn't have Facebook.
Right.
We didn't have Twitter. We were doing segments like, is Facebook bad for your kids? Call in now. You know, and all of that exposed me to language and thinking that I really hadn't been exposed to before. And it helped me. I mean, I remember reading a book about, uh, pay disparity between men and women. And I had different tools to bring to my boss and say, I'm worth this. This is what I think. And when I didn't get what I wanted and those conversations weren't going the way I thought they might, that's when I said, this isn't worth it anymore. It's time to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And I did.
I
I'm
think
sorry, I have to clear my throat.
so. When I was a kid, because I was born in '88, so 2002 to 2012, we're spanning maybe middle school, high school, and I know I graduated college in 11. So I think something that's so amazing, but also so hard about being a millennial is that you were raised by people who lived and tried their best to thrive before Lean In, Me Too, talking about the pay gap, talking about, women's labor in the home being respected and all of that. So you grew up in a very comfortable, like, everything's fine, la 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 la, ha 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 ha. Then we graduated college. And we graduated college into a world where jobs weren't that easy to get. And then we started looking around us and we were like, hey, so I think the way that my parents talked to me or in front of me made me really closed off to other people who live differently than me. And you're deprogramming all of that. And then you're like, well, wait, if other people who aren't me deserve empathy and compassion and equitable living, does that also mean that I too should be checking out on whether or not the environment that I'm working in, living in, hanging out with friends in also respects me? That's new. Oh my gosh. And then I, 3 years into therapy and I'm like, so you're telling me that in order for me to feel respected, I have to be respected by the people around me. All right. Who knew?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you were throwing out those dates, and I graduated high school in '89.
Mm-hmm.
And we were growing up in a time where, while it seemed like women had everything,
Yeah.
I remember my mother saying, hey, listen, it's a lot different. You guys have so many more choices. And she was already, she was very, I guess we'd say, very liberated. I don't know.
Mhm.
My mother always worked, but it wasn't something that we talked a lot about in my house. It was always expected that my sister and I would go to college. We would have all the benefits of education and everything else that any other a boy would have. We don't have brothers. But I remember it would come out in weird ways. Like one of the things that really made me excited about journalism was when I was in high school, I was on the swim team and we won everything that year. I mean, I had nothing to do with it. I was terrible, but it was great fun. And, but we won everything and we were not state champions, but regional or something. And the football team was terrible. And at the closing dinner, the football team got all the accolades and we got nothing. And I wrote an article about it for the school paper, like probably editorial. I don't have it. I wish I saved it.
Yeah.
But I got called in by the athletic director, who was a woman, who said, this is inappropriate, and if I'd had the tools I had today, I don't remember getting in real trouble. I don't remember feeling anything other than you've got to be kidding me. I mean, I was not worried about this. My parents were not concerned. It was ridiculous. But if I'd had the tools I'd had today, that story, I think, would have ended a little differently.
Yeah.
I would have been able to write it differently and maybe get some attention so it wasn't a time where things, we didn't realize things were happening still. I think we considered ourselves a little bit more on equal footing than we realized we were looking back, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense because I think that's where we are currently in the year 2022, where it's like we thought that we were inching along towards progress. And then when someone points out that it's like, well, yeah, you've been baby crawling towards progress, but it is the year 2022, and you forget to tell people that the women's suffragist movement lasted 88 years and like spanned like multiple lifetimes of people. When I read that statistic, because I had to write an article for a former job about the suffragette movement, I cried in my office and people are like, what's going on? I go, never knew. I never knew it was 88 years. They don't give you that number in school.
Yeah. You thought that lady in the Mary Poppins movie was running around her kitchen, and then one day she's singing that song, and then it was done.
Right. It was a 4-week, a couple of women went to jail, a couple of women marched in a park, and then we were done. And it was 88 years of them going, I don't know. I don't know. And then it was, well, maybe they'll stop talking about it if we just do it. So when you started in news radio or anywhere in your news career, do you have any distinct differences where that field was different for women compared to your male counterparts?
It's so interesting because when I worked in television news, it was, and if you look, after we talk, go and watch your local television stations. And I'm out of the game now for 10 years, and I'm out of television news 20 years, but I don't think this has changed that much. Television news, when I was there, was dominated by women. In fact, there were articles in the early 2000s, where are the men, right? And it was all dominated by women. And much of that was because the pay is atrocious.
Yeah.
It was always terrible. It's still terrible. And much of that is because 5,000 people want every single job. And, they'll move across the country to do it. It's a passion. It's fun. Like I said, you work with incredible people and you're on TV. There's a lot of people who want to be actors and actresses who can't make it, who do come in. Now, they don't last. I'll be honest with you. They don't last. And people on TV do get a bad rap.
Yeah.
Beauty queens or whatever. If you're not smart and you're not engaged and you're not a good presenter, you're not going to make it. But it does attract a lot of those people to start with. And part of the reason why it was also so dominated by women is because, and there was an article about this. There was an article about this a while back, that you can't make a really great living. So a lot of men who feel like they needed to earn more, they either moved up quickly, got to the network level and made more money, or they got out.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of women who were supported by their husbands, or they had money, or they had other means, or they were single and able to support themselves. And that's one of the reasons why it was so dominated by women. It's a wonderful environment, honestly. I mean, there's always going to be competition. There's always going to be somebody but it was never that stereotype of like, oh, it's a cat fight. They all hate each other. It was very supportive and really, really fun. But what happened to me, and I'm very frank about this, is I couldn't get promoted.
Yeah.
I'd been at that station for 3 years. Every female anchor opportunity had come up. I was hired by one news director who left. Another news director came in. And as almost always happens, he wanted to hire his own people. So when I would fill in for 3 months, like on the morning show, and then someone else would get hired, I decided I had to leave, right? Why am I going to stay? So I started looking around, but the radio station, which was just down the hall, was a place where I had done a bunch of guest appearances. And they actually reached out to me and said, would you want to come work here? That's a place that the FM has some women, it's got like the guy and the girl in the morning and the guy and the girl in the afternoon. But the AM station where I would be working was all men.
Yeah.
All men. And I knew it was going to be very, very different. And it wasn't just all men. News talk is older people, right? Listeners are older. At the time, I was 31 years old. The demo of the station is 55 plus. So I was thinking like, oh, what am I getting myself into? Right? Can I do this? Will these people relate to me? Can I be successful at all? And I actually wound up reaching out to Sherry Lynch, who is just an amazingly successful and talented woman in radio. She is a part of the Bob and Sherry show. Many of you may know that name. They actually own their own show now. They did an amazing job of taking that over. And I reached out to her. I was like, what do I do? How do you do this? How do you navigate it? And she was fantastic. She was so generous. She's been really generous over the course of her career, talking to me about these kinds of issues. She didn't really have any answers, though. She's still fighting it.
Yeah.
20 years later. It's very difficult. But she said, this management will respect you. This manager who's here, she was right. That general manager who hired me he was the unicorn. He respected women. Rick Jackson, I love you if you're out there. He respected women. He rewarded women. He listened to women. He didn't pay me enough when I started, Rick. I'll tell you that. I had to fight you over the years for that, but I got it eventually. Um, but it was a really interesting and different experience to go from television. This is a very long answer to your question, but to go from television where everybody was very young, very female, to go to news talk where everybody was much older. My co-host was 24 years older than me, and everybody was male. It was wild.
I didn't go back to my job before COVID, even when it opened back up. I worked at a theater. I didn't apply for it because I applied for a higher position within my department with a supervisor who watched my work ethic every day. And he told me, is that really a great fit for you, though? When I emailed him about it. And I was like, well, I've had a front row seat to this job for 2 years, so I don't know why it wouldn't be. And it laid such an impression on me because I was like, well, there it is. Because he would also pull these things in our work environment where other departments would want to get me involved because I was bright. I had a love for musical theater. I was enthusiastic. I was still the person who had the love for the art. So marketing would want to get me involved and programming would want to get me involved. And he'd go, I know Natalie said that she could fit that into her schedule, but like, I really need her, like, we need her calmed down and just like, she doesn't need to be involved in everything. And it's like, so I just knew that going back to that situation, it would be another situation where it's like, even if I'm working very hard, even if I'm good at this, it all depends on the person who's overseeing you, whether or not you'll be successful in that role and be allowed to be noticed by other people.
Yeah, it really is. It's tough that way because you want to think that, talent rises and, people will notice. But if you don't have the right manager in there, first of all, they may not understand how to cultivate what they've got, right? And some people just prioritize different things. I mean, I had a manager. We changed ownership hands quite a few times. I'm trying to remember how many. We didn't go through too many managers. We went through several companies while I was there. Radio is wild. But the last manager I worked for, I don't know what he thought about any of the talent, right? Any of the people who worked on the radio station, really. He was so concerned with money that overrode everything. And I can't really fault him for it. He could have hidden it better because they had bought the radio station for such an enormous amount of money. And then the recession hit and it was worth so much less that it was a very difficult time for everybody. So he had no choice. I mean, I see it from his point of view, right? I'm glad I wasn't his manager. I'm glad I had a contract. But he stopped thinking of us, or if he ever started, we were not people, we were numbers.
Yeah.
And I knew, that's why when I left, I think he was so happy to just get my paycheck off the roll.
One less number on the payroll.
Really what it was all about. It really was. He was very funny. He told me at the time, no one's going to believe I didn't fire you. And I was like, well, that's your problem.
That's your problem. I don't know.
But they didn't replace me for 10 years. They just hired somebody this year.
Yeah.
And I'd love to think it's because I'm irreplaceable, but I do, while it is that, it's also because of the financials of it all. It's very difficult.
It's really hard when you're in these performative careers where I noticed that my artist soul would kind of turn a blind eye to the financials of it all. And when I was ready to face those numbers, I was like, oh, that's why the numbers matter. And they were like, yes, that is why the numbers matter. I was like, okay. Do you think that the misogyny that courses through our society, do you think it had a hand in the stories that you were allowed to present while you were working in the news or on the radio?
This is one of those questions is why I almost backed out of this interview.
That's okay.
So I would say that while I'm uncomfortable calling it misogyny, right? I mean, let's face it, it's out there and we understand that it exists. I think that my audience of this radio station was, I mean, you got to think about who these people are, right? It's 55 and over. It's probably older than that today because I don't know who listens to AM radio, right?
Yeah.
Think about that for a moment. And it was predominantly male, but at the time it was more like 60-40. So it wasn't, as heavily male as you might think. And believe it or not, and I get that question all the time about being allowed to report.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about whatever we found interesting, whether it was, is my kid on Facebook and what does that mean? Or they're renaming the local high school after this fabulous man whose last name is Huff, but one of the parents thought it was going to be pronounced Ho and had a heart attack.
Yeah.
That's my favorite story.
That's a great story.
My son goes to that school and I'm like, oh, 10 years ago, you have no idea what kind of controversy there was over the mispronunciation of that name. Very funny. But we talked about whatever we thought would be interesting to our listeners. Now, that listener was an older man.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot, I mean, and like I said, 40% women. But so sometimes I could get pushed through things that I thought were interesting, but I had to filter it, to your question. Yeah. I had to filter it through that lens of how is this going to be received. One of the first things we talked about way back when was whether Augusta National, the golf course where the Masters are held, mm-hmm. should admit women. And that was a tough one because I've said, of course they should.
Yeah.
And that was not a popular take. So things like that, you know, were, and especially as a newer person at the radio station, 5 years later, I probably could have said whatever I wanted because we won them over. But that's the kind of thing that would happen. The main research that came back, you know, they do research on all the talent and all everybody at the radio station. The main research that came back on me was, I really like Stacey, except when she sounds like my wife is yelling at me or my wife is scolding me. Right. And I will never forget, one of my program directors said early on, he's like, you've got to figure out a way to sound like their girlfriend and not their wife. I was like, well, that's not going to happen. Like, what do we say on the radio? You know, it was very strange.
Just flirting with invisible people.
Right? Oh, you're so funny. You're so funny. But it was really interesting to me that most of the listeners that I met didn't say things like that. Mm-hmm. You know, they wanted to know my point of view. They wanted to talk to us about issues. They were interested in our lives. But in the research and in the broader nameless kind of cloud that's out there, right? It was more like, you know, I just don't want her to be like my wife. Mm-hmm. And it's so strange to me that was the research that came back. I was like, dude, I am 25 years younger than you.
Right.
Mr. Listener, don't worry.
There wouldn't be a chance for me to be your wife, but thank you. I think, so we just released a couple of weeks ago a episode where this young woman stood in front of Ohio legislation and she was talking about period stigma and period poverty and how the pink tax is detrimental to the state of Ohio. And she made almost kind of the same point where she was like, I almost had to basically convince them that I was their daughter and that's why they should care.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the only way I could have presented anything like that. I'm sure we never talked about that. We might now, obviously, you know, no one was really talking about that in the 2000s. Mm-hmm. But it was something you'd have to kind of know your audience, and to make them listen and understand, you do have to be thoughtful in how you present it. I mean, you know, these guys are, you know, the guys I worked with, these were great guys. They were smart, they were engaged, they were so much fun to work with. But, you know, like men of their generation, they had ideas, mm-hmm. right? They had thoughts, they had stereotypes, they had things that we would challenge each other on. And I really think that in the time I was there, not just because of me, but just by my presence, right? Just by being and breathing in the same air, I think that they learned an awful lot. And I did too, but I don't feel like I think it's not, I mean, it may not be the right word to use, the misogyny mm-hmm. in the station was not necessarily there. I think, however, that we knew that our audience was of a certain mindset.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful because what you're really doing is you're creating a show where you want them to listen to the commercials.
It's amazing how even, and maybe it was only the few who were like, we're really pissed. She sounds like my naggy wife. Like, it's like I didn't take out the garbage out. But this morning I switched over from, it's a show called Critical Role. They play D&D. I'm a nerd. And I switched over from their main campaign where a man named Matthew Mercer has been leading the game for 3 years. Everyone loves his style. We're all Team Matt. And they did a spinoff. And now the game master is a woman of color. And she presents very feminine when she's describing what's going on in the world around them. She leans into joking with her players and saying things like, "Ooh, that was a mood, that call that you made." And she's a looser game master than Matt was. And I never Google anything about Critical Role, even when I like miss a fact, because when I do, it's just a lot of like really angry guys screaming about the women on the stream. And now that she's the game master, it's all, it's just very apparent that she doesn't even care about this game and she's not even doing this and that. And I'm like, all right. But so I'm years behind in the content lineup. Now they're doing this other spin-off where a guy is the game master. And it's not Matt, but it's at least a guy that we can recognize. And now he's their hero. He's like, they're like, it's such a fresh breath of air to have like Brennan really hone in on the craft and all of it. And I was like, of course it is. Good for you.
I think, gaming in particular is so difficult. I can't claim to know that world. But it is one of those situations. I have a son and a daughter, and my son is really into playing games online. And I don't, he's 17. I don't monitor every single thing he does anymore. But my daughter, who, as I said, is older than him, has for years kind of been a check on both of us. Been like, make sure, you know what he's doing. Or she talks to him about, everything from the politics that people talk about during the games to what games he's playing. And she's been great because he's a good kid, but he's a doofus. He's 17.
Yeah.
And you could easily see him and kids of that age kind of falling and following that lead of that, that bro culture of like, this is cool, that's not cool. And I'm glad to have kind of her voice to help him along because it's not something that I'm at all familiar with.
And it just connects to this idea that you really do have to play to your audience. But that doesn't mean that playing to your audience, this is how I've been feeling all morning while I'm watching Critical Role. I'm like, yes, you are a part of their fan space and you are a part of the experience that they're putting together. However, your feelings or unchecked biases or whatever can't really be dictating every move they're making in their content, because then how, as a community, do you learn more?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, we've seen it from everything from like the Star Wars community, right, to gaming and different things, because you want to expand the universe. You want to expand what people, you want to expand the fandom. You want to have more heroes and roles and characters that everybody can follow. And at the same time, you're still trying to please that main audience, right, while bringing them along. And you're also trying to, I don't know how you do this. You're trying to quiet and not give any oxygen to the people that are I don't like that, I'm uncomfortable with it, but are vocally trying to make others uncomfortable. And, I think we've seen more and more. I mean, mine is, again, my reference is Star Wars.
Yeah.
But they come out now and they don't even mess around anymore. They're like, don't be racist, quit it,
knock it off. Yeah.
Right. I don't know how much it helps, but I think it makes the people that are newer to the community, that are younger, that feel underrepresented, it at least makes them feel seen and heard, which goes a long way. So I think it's very difficult to expand that audience and not expect some pushback. You just hope the pushback is reasonable. And if it's not, you've got to call it out.
Yeah. And you're allowed to have your opinion, but I feel like when we get into these audience views, and when I was working in theater, and as a theater goer, I see it all the time, where someone will watch a beautiful production and get pissed off about 30 seconds of it. And they'll want to make that 30 seconds the whole point of everything. And I'm like, no, we were having a good time for 2 hours. Who killed the vibe? And so when the women are harassed on this gaming company Critical Role, and I think this is the message too, like it has to come from the people who naturally get the power and naturally get to have that part of the audience on their side. So there's a guy, he's obnoxious. He makes a lot of obnoxious jokes. But he used to work in digs at the audience who were harassing their female players into the bits that he would do. And I was like, well, now you've sold me that you're actually a person who wants this to change. And I wish they would listen to you.
Yeah. It's fabulous when that happens. And I will say that some of that comes naturally, right? There's some guys that are just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that comes from us pointing it out. I was about 6 or 7 years into my show, and I have a co-host or had a co-host. We spent 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day in this little studio. There were about 4 or 5 of us, but he and I were the core. And it took us that long before we finally had a really blunt conversation about some of the dynamics. And after that, he was an incredible ally. And I
Mm-hmm.
wish I'd done it sooner because he just didn't realize. He didn't realize uh, what he was doing. He didn't realize kind of the environment that he had created, and it wasn't that difficult
Mm-hmm.
once I pointed some things out. Now, it's not always going to be that easy, right? There's going to be
Right.
pushback, but sometimes we kind of wish everybody would magically understand this stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
especially people who are people who are very comfortable and have been doing
Mm-hmm.
the same thing for a very long time. Especially if you have a relationship with them and they value you, you can kind of speak up to say, "Yeah, have you thought about this? Or
Right.
can you help me with that?" And it's a really eye opening experience for a lot of people. It's unfortunate because you kind of do it one at a time, at
Right.
least from where I sit.
You have to like put your hands on their cheeks and go, "Hi, you've been very comfortable in power for your entire life, and I love that for you. But could you indulge me a moment of opening your eyes to the discomfort of everyone else?" I have a friend who they have a partner who is African American, and we were having this very frank conversation about our activism compared to their partner. And we were saying, like, well, sometimes, and my friend was saying, I'm just able to lay it down sometimes, and my partner won't. And I approach the comfort of being a white woman this way, where I go, well, I have the privilege to lay that down because I get to pick it up and care about it when I care about it. And then I get to put it down and rest from it. And that's fine because my whiteness is the buffer there. Your partner has to live in that world all the time. There's no putting it in a box and putting it away. So I always try to combat that comfort in the way that things have been going with empathy, but you do have to push back on it because sometimes comfortable people don't honestly know that the world around them might be a little more uncomfortable for other people. And it's not a story that we sell very often.
Oh, and I think as human beings, we can be really bad at big picture stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it's like, oh, those poor people over there, right? It doesn't register. But if someone you know and you care about is having an issue
Mm-hmm.
and your eyes are open to that, quite often it can open your eyes to a whole other bunch of issues. And it was funny, when you were going through that story, and you can kind of lay it down and pick it back up when you want to. I think when you're talking to people, and this is a stereotype too, but when you're
Mm-hmm.
talking to people of a certain age and a certain experience, if you start, my daughter does this a lot. She'll talk in the same kind of terms that you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, People just close off.
Yeah.
Right. I'm very uncomfortable with that. I don't want to hear it. No. But what the conversation I had with my broadcast partner was, he had kind of used the analogy of being a quarterback, right? He was a quarterback. He was the main guy, right? So he was
Mm-hmm.
going to throw the football and we were going to catch it and do the plays. And that worked for a very long time. We all understood it. But what I said to him was, I'm really tired of playing that way. I
Yeah.
don't understand why we can't play doubles tennis. Why aren't we a volleyball team? Why aren't we together? Why aren't we equal partners?
Mm-hmm.
In a sports metaphor. Now, it's silly, and he would be the first one to laugh and say, "You don't need to tell me in sports metaphors. I'm smarter than that."
Yeah.
But for some reason, that got through to him and opened the conversation that we could have about being a younger woman struggling in this environment, trying to find my voice, trying to make him realize that I'm not out for his job. I'm trying
Right.
to raise all boats, right? And that was a way in, whereas if I had come in with different language, I don't think he would have been receptive.
Mm-hmm.
So I know some of you listening are like, well, we don't have to tiptoe around them. You don't, but your message may be heard if you're able to get it through the door in a different way, is all I'm
Right.
saying.
And I play both sides, just like doubles tennis, where it's like I'm either pushing and I'm just screaming against the void because I'm mad that day, or I'm tiptoeing and I'm like, come on, everyone. We can do it. Like we can get past this angry lion and none of us are going to get bit. Come on, everyone. We can do it.
Well, a lot of it's knowing your audience.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's a huge takeaway because I know that I've always felt, or I haven't always felt, I know that in the past I have felt that, well, the reason they're not getting it is because they're choosing not to get it or they refuse to see it or whatever. But honestly, now I'm living under this phrase of I refuse to know all of the things at all of the time because that's unreasonable and it blows up my brain to try and be the master of all of the things. So I also have to give that grace to other people to be like, wow, you may not have known that there was a pink tax in Ohio. That's startling for me, but you may not have known that.
Well, look at the tampon shortage.
Mm-hmm.
Show me a guy, even a great guy, who's like, well, can't you just go without them? We have a tampon shortage right now.
Right, we do.
And it's not getting any media. I mean, a little bit here and there. Because guys are like, oh, just don't have your period, or maybe plan it better, or use some leaves. I don't know what they think, but they don't think it's an issue. It's very interesting. And it's a good example of even people who are very enlightened. We don't know everything about everything.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I try to humble myself on, because I fall flat on this, is because I choose to be childless, every once in a while I forget to watch my mouth about how much I enjoy my childless life. And then my friends who have children are like, I let my children do that at the movie theater, you asshole. And I'm like, well, your child ruined the movie for me then. Like, I don't know. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I was at Jurassic Park to watch Jeff Goldblum and your kid was screaming. I don't know. And so it equates that for me. It's really hard to take yourself out of your mindset and to watch my own mouth. So you have to imagine how hard it is for people to be living one way. And then all of a sudden the world's like, we'd like it to be purple. We've always kept it blue and we've always kept it red. But what if it was purple just to try it? And then people are like, I might have to learn new vocabulary and I'm old and I don't have to take the SAT anymore. So why? Why? Tell me about Diabetes Connection and why you felt that it was important to build a community within our diabetes community.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me do that. So I started Diabetes Connections in 2015 as a podcast. I had been doing a presentation called Diabetes Connections for a couple of years before that. I was a blogger back in the days of blogging.
Yeah.
And it was a community blogger for a company, and it was just really fun. But my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which used to be called juvenile diabetes. Type 1 is an autoimmune disease. It's genetic. It's also kind of random. Most people with type 1 do not have a genetic link, but I'm going to describe it horribly, even though I've been describing it for 15 plus years. You're born with kind of the setup in your body for it, and it's triggered by something exterior, like every autoimmune disease, right? They don't exactly know what happens. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset. It is caused by other things. It's not just lifestyle. It's not just eating too much and being too sedentary. They're finding out all sorts of environmental triggers and genetic triggers as well. But he had type 1. He was 23 months old, and we were thrown into another life, totally different. So I started blogging about that immediately. Didn't really talk about it on the radio because we didn't talk about our personal lives a lot. But I started blogging. And then I started the podcast when I left the radio station because that's what I do.
Yeah.
Also because there are a lot of diabetes podcasts out there, but they weren't what I wanted to hear. They were great, but to me, they were incomplete. They were mostly personal stories of adults living with type 1, which is fabulous. And I still listen to a lot of those. But I wanted a news podcast. I wanted to do interviews with technology companies, with the insulin companies, with athletes and celebrities. I wanted to hear more of a magazine type news show. So that's what I created. And it's 7 years now. I'm going to be, I'm approaching episode 500. I'm so excited about it. I love doing it. And it's not about my son. I share a little bit about him here and there. He's been on the show several times. My daughter's been on the show too to complain about how lousy it is to have a sibling who gets all the attention. And she's right, it stinks. But it's just been such a great outlet for me to learn. And it has, just like everything else over the last 5 to 7 years, we've learned so much about access and affordability, about racial disparity, about media and how it covers diabetes. So it's been a really, really eye-opening experience for me in a lot of ways, and I just love doing it.
I love that you're doing it because it relates to what you were saying about the tampon shortage. I think when someone is diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, people just go, oh, but you'll manage that because now you have to. And it's like, yes, but you have to take into account how insurance in our company works or what technology is available to what neighborhoods and things like that. And the more that you can put that story in the forefront, the more people like me whose life is quote unquote not affected by diabetes can empathize with it. We had a woman working at the theater whose son had diabetes, and she would talk about like waking up in the middle of the night with it and all of it. And the people that I worked with in my stupid department would roll their eyes and complain that she was frazzled or tired or whatever. And I was like, well, she did just say that she had to wake up to a medical emergency at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. But we have this idea that like, well, can't you just handle that? And it's like, no. Would you tell a mother with a 2-week-old baby who's just crying and she's crying and we're all frazzled, like, can't you just handle that? I mean, some people would.
It's funny. Just before we spoke, I was wrapping up an interview for my show, and I was talking to a woman with type 1. She's doing a documentary. It's actually quite an interesting story. She's doing a documentary about stem cell research.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked her, how are you doing? How are you doing? You've had type 1 since you were in college. How are you doing? And then we both laughed because what do you say to
What
that?
do you say?
And I always laugh because when I talk to people outside the community, outside the diabetes community,
Mm-hmm.
even my close friends, they say, oh, how is your son doing? And it's like, he's fine. It's fine. We're fine. And then when you are in the community, you can have the real discussions because people get it. But I think what I found very interesting is diabetes podcasts are listened to mostly, not entirely, but most podcasts, right, are listened to people who are very technically savvy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be technically savvy to operate your iPhone and listen to a podcast. But generally speaking, people who listen to podcasts are more technically savvy. As a group, they are better educated, all those statistics. And it's been fascinating to see me and my audience kind of learn that, well, we have all this access to technology and we can afford it and we have usually pretty good insurance. But then, these studies come out, especially in the last couple of years, that children of color are given insulin pumps at a much lower rate than white kids in the same city. I hope everybody knows now about the insulin affordability crisis going on in this country. It's really been an incredible education for me, not just in things like stem cells, which
Right.
are exciting to talk about, and new technology, but just to see what I thought type 1 diabetes was 10 years ago with my son was an incomplete picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a real education.
Well, and I think one of the things that happens with a medical diagnosis, like take for instance my depression, is people almost feel like you're choosing to be in a depressive episode. It's like, what do you mean you can't afford your pills? Why would you choose a way of life where you can't afford your pills? And it's like, well, why am I living somewhere where I didn't choose to have diabetes, but they won't give me an insulin pump because it's somehow my fault, my mom's fault, the governor's fault that I have it? I don't know.
Yeah. It's an interesting, and maybe that's not the right word, but it is an interesting condition because there's very few conditions in the US or in the world where people do blame the person with it, right? And if you have diabetes, then obviously you're a horrible person and did something to cause it to yourself. That hashtag, it's not as bad anymore, but a couple of years ago, the hashtag diabetes on social media was always used for desserts. Things like that, it was terrible, or like diabetes on a plate.
Yeah.
Obesity and diabetes are some of the few things that we're still allowed to really blame the person who's dealing with it for. And it's more than a joke. It has real effects on people's lives and policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. During the period stigma episode, we talked about how it's recently come out in new research that I was right. The cramps that I experienced when I was in college did feel like dying. They are now likening it to a heart attack. So I would like compensation for all of the people who told me, why don't you just try to take a nap? I think you're being a little outrageous about the fact that your body is trying to rip itself into two. And it's one of those things where, because the mindset is, well, can't you just handle that? And we push through and we knuckle down, then it's also hard to breed a community out of that. So I am so happy to have connected with you, because to me, community is everything. And if you're constantly hearing, you should be able to do this and you should be able to handle it, and this shouldn't be a detriment to you or the people around you or anything, that's a very lonely place to be.
It is. I think, and I do think that type 1 diabetes in particular, and diabetes overall, is a very lonely condition. You're doing all of this stuff and it's quite invisible unless you want it to be visible. You know, my son wears an insulin pump and a continuous glucose monitor. He's super open about it, which we're lucky. He's a pretty happy, easygoing kid, but he's met a lot of people and he has friends that are much more private about it. And unless he's beeping, a lot of his friends don't realize he's taking care of stuff. And he's doing it several times a day, as you have to with type 1. But I think that this community, and if you listen and you have diabetes and you're not part of the diabetes community yet, please find us. Come on board. It is the most supportive. It is such a fabulous community. It is full of people who have been alone, who found their people, who celebrate their people, who show their differences, who are all shapes and sizes, who call out problematic people, who do not put up with nonsense. It is fabulous, and it is welcoming of different points of view.
Yeah.
There is a chat. I don't know if anybody wants to join Twitter anymore, because be careful. But there's been a chat on Twitter for 10 years, probably more than that now, and the hashtag's DSMA, Diabetes Social Media Advocacy. And she runs a tight ship. Cherise Shockley started that many years ago. And by that, I mean all points of view, all types of diabetes are welcome. And if you are uncomfortable by that, if you say, you know, you're not welcome because you eat a different way or you dose a different way, or she will say, no, we're all here. We're all doing the best we can. She's wonderful. She's actually told me recently she's got something new up her sleeve, because Twitter chats are kind of, you know, they're going the way of blogging, it seems. But every Wednesday for years and years and years, a bunch of people have gathered there to talk about it. So all of that to say, if you have any type of diabetes, please find the diabetes community, because I guarantee we will help you live better and live happier as well. Not just my show. I don't mean my show. I mean all of it.
Right. All of it. Have as many friends as you can gather.
Yeah. And like I said, there's a dozen diabetes podcasts out there. And if mine doesn't speak to you, another one might. So I would definitely urge you to check them out.
Twitter intimidates the hell out of me, and no one can convince me otherwise. They convinced me that I could be on TikTok. So now I'm a 30-year-old on TikTok.
Nice. I think Twitter's changed. I mean, to be honest with you, I've been on Twitter since 2008. And it was one of the best places. It was so much fun. And now it's media and politics.
Yeah.
So I'm not on it very often. I mean, I read it and I post my show there, but it's difficult. We had some great conversations there, and now it's too full of anger.
Yeah, it is. It's a very angry place.
Yeah.
And I can kind of cultivate the exact kind of internet experience I want through all of the other platforms. And then there's Twitter, and I'm like, nah. Bro,
so don't go there.
Right, bro, you're a bully. Like, I can't. We have two traditions onto All the Men I've Tolerated Before, where we reflect on our biggest growth moment or lesson that we've learned from the topics we discussed today. And then we walk away from some of these conversations that are uncomfy or, heavy, and we manifest some joy back out into the universe. So, what do you think has been your biggest lesson out of news radio, diabetes? Take it where you need to take it.
I think the biggest lesson I learned was to know my value and to be able to articulate it, defend it, and really be able to understand it. Now, I'm going to tell a quick story, and it's a tough one. And I will preface it by saying I was okay with doing this. And I had the financial flexibility. I had a husband, right, who was working. So I could do this. And in the end of the story is I left my job. And I know that everybody can do that. But I do think it's really important to know your value. So I was at a place where my co-host had left. He had retired and they were going to bring on somebody else because it's a two-person show. And my contract was not up until the fall. But I went in the spring to my boss, to the guy that I told you earlier about who's counting all the numbers. And I had prepared. I had really done my homework. And I said to him, I want to talk about my contract. I know it's not up till the fall, but I want to tell you why I'm the most valuable employee in this building. And I did. And my program director, who's a good friend of mine, my program director was sitting next to me. I think he almost fell off his chair because he was not expecting me to say that. But I made my case. He listened. He said, these are great points, but we're doing these contracts in order. This guy's first, this guy's next, then you. And I said, all right, okay. And then I got sick. Yeah. That was when I had the issues. And that's when my mindset changed to the point where when I went back to work, I'd been home for about 6 weeks. And by the end of that, my mindset was, do I really want to go back to this job? These people don't value me. They don't know me. They don't care about me. And it was that classic moment of taking a legal pad and putting a line down the middle and pros and cons of, all right, I get up at 2:30 in the morning every day. I'm making this much. That's a pro. That's great. I have health insurance. That's great. I have no advancement at this company as long as this dude is in that office, and really making a list. And I decided to leave.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's the healthiest decision I may have made. It's not one that I have ever regretted. I miss mainstream radio because it's just so much fun. But I don't miss that job, and I don't miss getting up at that time of day. So that's my big flex.
Yeah, no, I went through something similar during my COVID unemployment. It was really hard re-entering the workforce because nothing makes you feel more undervalued in a workforce than when you had an entire year to take care of yourself and love what you loved and all of it. So it's been a hard adjustment for me, but I think that point hitting home of you have to be where you're valued or what's the point of being there is so important.
And be introspective. Take the time to know your value, not just what your salary could be, but what are you good at? What do you enjoy? What can you contribute that also can make you money?
Yeah.
I mean, you've really got to think these things through rather than just saying, I'm fabulous, pay me. You've got to make your case. And it didn't work for me. And that's okay. I know that it should have worked. I know that it was just, it was out of my control. But doing that exercise has helped, really helped guide me for it. That was 10 years ago.
I think the biggest takeaway, because I know that this is it's a growth area for me. I think my biggest takeaway from today is it's okay to play with your audience. I've been toying with this idea of like, well, everyone's relationship with me really doesn't have that much to do with me because I can't control what's in their head. But you can present yourself in a way that's attractive to the people who are maybe having discourse with you or haven't gotten to where you are yet with the topic that's in hand. And it actually would get you further than if you're just going, I can't believe that you don't get this, or I can't believe that you haven't read up on this.
Yeah. It's tough because you want to be genuine. Right. You don't want to be fake about it. You get more honey. What is it that saying? You get more flies with honey than with vinegar. Yeah. Right. We don't want to go that far. But you definitely want to be welcoming and listening as much as you can until the other person indicates that that's not working.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
And then what do you think is your biggest manifestation or hope for people moving on into the future?
What a question.
I know.
Like for humanity moving forward?
For the listeners, for yourself, for anybody.
I think it goes back to something that you and I talked about, I don't know, a long time ago on this episode, which is that it doesn't happen all at once. And unfortunately, we as human beings need to meet people and need to see it for ourselves. And I know there's a lot of talk about like, well, that's just empathy. And you should just automatically have empathy. And you should understand that this happens to everybody. But I don't think that's how we're wired as people.
No.
when you look back, and I talk to my kids about this and they can't believe it, but when you look back at the issue of gay marriage, that is one of the quickest changing issues of my lifetime. It seemed like it went from, oh my God, if gay people get married, the world will end, to it's done. And, it happened and it's accepted. And that happened because everybody knew somebody. It happened because families that thought, well, nobody is gay here, their beloved son, right? Their wonderful father, their aunt, their grandmother, right? People learned that they knew somebody and loved somebody. And that's how that changed. And so I think that is unfortunately, because it would be faster if it didn't take it, to that granular level. I think that's my hope, is if we continue to have these conversations, if we continue to learn more and meet people, right? Somebody now with type 1 diabetes, if you didn't before, as you listen or as you're hosting, and maybe that'll get you curious about it. Somebody who has an autoimmune disease, somebody who has an allergic reaction to medication and how to leave her job. Like all of these things add up, I think, to incremental change. It's just really slow, but it happens.
I think my manifestation is going to bounce off of yours and be the partner to that. I think in order for people to be able to meet people where they're at, people have to be living an authentic life. So I'm hoping that we're moving forward into a world, a society, all of it, where I feel comfortable enough living my authentic depressed life so that the people around me can learn more about depression and empathize with it. So it's a double-edged sword. Like, you have to be authentic in order for people to learn about you, and you have to be open to learning about people for people to be authentic.
No, it's a good point. It really is. It's tough.
Yeah.
But continuing down that road, I think, will be difficult, but will be worth it.
I am so glad that you didn't back out of this. Is it condescending for me to tell you that I'm proud of you? Because I tell that to my guests that are usually around my age.
Not at all. Not at all. I appreciate it very much. I again, these are tough conversations and some, tough things to talk about. So no, I appreciate that.
I appreciate you, and thank you so much for being here and spending part of your afternoon with me. Please let the Tolerators know where they can find you and connect with you.
I'd love to connect. So I'm on Twitter. You can find me. I think the best place is probably Instagram. I am Stacey Simms, StaceySimms. I'm on Twitter and Facebook as the same. And I am in bookstores with my sequel to The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, still The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, out November. So I'm really excited about that. But easy to find. And also the website is diabetes-connections.com if you'd like to listen to the podcast, or wherever you're listening to this podcast.
That's right. Congratulations on the second book.
Thank you.
As someone who has drafted one children's book and then did nothing with it, or has an idea for a poetry book and even wrote down some titles for those poems and then put it on a shelf, I understand the undertaking to write not one, but 2 books that you got published.
You'll get there. You'll get there.
I'll just knock on that. Tolerators, thanks so much for being with us wherever you are and whenever you are. You know how to find us. We're on Instagram, Patreon, Fireside, TikTok, and it's all in that Linktree link in your show notes. And we're now blogging again to get the transcript of the podcast out there, because I've heard that if you transcript your podcast, the internet somehow support you. I'm very tech savvy with the SEO and the algorithms. And remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including not feeling like you can come towards someone with a different point of view and maybe educate them a little, but also learn a little. Smiles are for joy. Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I'm just here real quick to tell you that To All the Men I've Tolerated Before officially has merchandise. So if you're looking for a really great way to support the show and get our name out there so everyone can be on Team Tolerator, Consider following the link in our show notes or in the bio of our Instagram at Men I've Tolerated Pod so you can buy one of our title tees or see some of our holiday lines like our feminist spooky line that includes t-shirts like Misogyny is Monstrous or My Past Relationships Still Haunt Me with a beautiful haunted house on it. Happy spooky season, have a great day, and go shopping and treat yourself. You deserve it.